Vijnanatimidasya Gananjana Shalakoya Chakshu Unmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnubraya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvasesha Shunyabhari Pashtatadeshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Okay, Bhagavad-Gita as it is, chapter 3 entitled Karma Yoga, text 6. Karmendriyani samyamya ya aste manasasmaran indriyarthan vimudatma mityachara sauchate. One who restrains the senses of action but whose mind dwells on sense objects certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. Purport. There are many pretenders who refuse to work in Krishna consciousness but make a show of meditation while actually dwelling within the mind upon sense enjoyment. Such pretenders may also speak on dry philosophy in order to bluff sophisticated followers. But according to this verse, these are the greatest cheaters. For sense enjoyment, one can act in any capacity of the social order, but if one follows the rules and regulations of his particular status, he can make gradual progress in purifying his existence. But he who makes a show of being a yogi while actually searching for the objects of sense gratification must be called the greatest cheater, even though he sometimes speaks of philosophy. His knowledge has no value, because the effects of such a sinful man's knowledge are taken away by the illusory energy of the Lord. Such a pretender's mind is always impure, and therefore his show of yogic meditation has no value whatsoever. Okay. So I'd first of all like to, actually I didn't do word for word translations, but the karma indriyani, the 5 working sense organs, one who restrains those, samyamya, controlling, but within the mind, manasa, he's thinking of the indriyartam, the sense objects. He remains a vimuda. Muda means a fool, but when you add the V prefix to it, it means very, like he's a very foolish, super mudha, who pretends that he can control his senses, but his mind is dwelling on the sense objects, and he is called an achara, a pretender. One who restrains the senses of action, but whose mind dwells on sense objects, certainly deludes himself and is called a pretender. The word deludes means to, make someone believe something that's not true. So there's many false, Prabhupada is explaining in the purport, there's many false yogis who delude themselves and others by acting spiritually advanced, and they give some sophisticated talk, and they give some cheap form of meditation, and they create many followers in this way. There was one such person who actually has a lot of fans in the US. I meet them when I'm out distributing books. Osho, and one time Prabhu was distributing books, and one person said, "I'm really interested in this. I'm actually a follower of Osho," and Vijay's response was, "Oh, isn't that the sex guru?" Because that was his philosophy, is that you can actually do anything. His philosophy was actually, you enjoy the senses to such a degree that eventually you get burnt out from it, and you don't want to enjoy anymore. So he was advocating this idea of enjoying as much as you want and meditating for some time during the day, and eventually, you'll realize that you are actually the Supreme. So because the living entity has come into this world to actually try to be the Supreme Controller and the Supreme Enjoyer, a lot of people actually fall for this philosophy because it gives them an opportunity to feel something spiritual, but at the same time maintain their desire to want to be God. And in the West, yoga is a completely perverted reflection of the actual yoga. In chapter 6, Krishna explains dhyana yoga, and he explains all the steps that go into that and how austere a person has to live. Goes to the forest, performs penances, he basically fasts, he secludes himself away from society, and there is an 8-step process, Ashtanga yoga, and first of all starting with yama niyama, things to do, things not to do, which are favorable for your yoga practice, and eventually attaining samadhi, which is the highest stage of yoga. And in this the Ashtanga yoga, people actually, the advanced yogi will start meditating on the supersoul within his heart. But people actually, they don't understand these steps. They either just perform the asanas as a bodily exercise to stay fit. It's almost like a social. It's a social event. People get together in tight pants and they do stretches and they go out and they have coffee afterwards and go to the bar. Where on the other hand, some people just are trying to perform samadhi without qualifying themselves with the 7 preliminary steps. They just try to meditate and do all sort of nonsense afterwards. So what we are presenting is the real thing. This is pure philosophy coming down from Krishna himself through the parampara, and that's when the pure thing is presented, it acts. It actually it has an effect. Just like if you were given nutritious food, you're automatically going to become healthy and strong from that. So similarly, when Srila Prabhupada came to America for the first time, many of his soon-to-be followers were interested in some sort of bogus philosophy, like I had just mentioned, or some of them were not spiritual at all. But because Prabhupada presented the real thing, people took to it. And he presented it straightforward. He did not have to in certain times, he put down the idea of creating an attractive scene for the eyesight to attract the populace. Just like one devotee was asking him, what is the best way to engage the crowd when we're out on Harinam Sankirtan? And Prabhupada's response to that was, we're not trying to please the crowd. We're out chanting to please Krishna. And the sincere people, when they see that, they'll be attracted. And similarly, I think it was in that famous cook, Korma Prabhu, I think he was in Australia, right? He presented the idea of doing something similar to what the roadshow was doing, the traveling roadshow with Vishnu Jan Maharaj. And Prabhupada's response to that was that we don't have to come up with so many fanciful things to try to attract a crowd. You just present the pure message. You can do it in an attractive way. Of course, use your intelligence to present it nicely according to time, place, and circumstance. But those who are presenting it straightforwardly, the people who are sincere will actually take to it. And not that we're trying to create millions of stars that eventually dwindle and fade away. But Prabhupada mentioned, he emphasized that if you just create one moon, that one moon can create so many other moons, just like a touchstone. There's one place he was replying to a letter to a devotee, and he said that better than creating millions of so-called followers, it's better just to create a few men to join us for ecstatic hearing and chanting. And this will actually bring Krishna the most pleasure. So those who restrain their senses of action, but their minds dwell with, on the sense objects, considered to be pretenders. But in this next verse, text 7, Krishna says, but on the other hand, if a sincere person tries to control the active senses by the mind and begins karma yoga and Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. So even a devotee who isn't necessarily so advanced, he may still be struggling with anarthas, but if he is a sincere person and he is trying to control the active senses by the mind, and he begins the process of Krishna consciousness without attachment, he is by far superior. It's recommended that one does not go off in seclusion and chant alone. And it's better to just, stay in the association of devotees. This keeps one strong. Just like the example is given, if you have one stick, you can easily break it. But if you have a bundle of sticks, it's harder to break. So in chapter 2, and the purport to text 59, when Krishna is explaining how, first of all, Arjuna in text 54, he asked Krishna a question. And what he asked him is, he's wondering, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? And he says, how does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? How does he walk? So from text 54 through text 70, Krishna is giving answers to that question. And a few of these, text 60 through 67, Krishna is actually, what he does is he first of all establishes the answer to Arjuna's question, and then he explains how to take precautionary measures for a transcendentalist who is trying to control his senses. So in text 59, Krishna is explaining how those who, or rather text 58, he gives the example of a tortoise. And he says that one who was able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell is firmly fixed in perfect consciousness. In text 59, though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains, but seizing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness. So in the beginning, it may take some force to actually control the senses. You may have to, with your intelligence from reading the Bhagavad-Gita and reading the Shastra, hearing from the spiritual master, your intelligence becomes fixed, and you know right from wrong. You know how to act in certain situations. So when the sense objects come in contact with the senses, and you feel an inclination of enjoyment, Krishna is explaining how to actually deal with that situation and to act like a tortoise. Draw your senses from the sense objects. And Krishna explains in text 62 of chapter 2, that when a person is contemplating the objects of the senses, a person develops attachment for them. And from such attachment, lust develops. So instead of even letting that process begin of contemplating the objects of the senses, immediately, nip it in the bud. When a weed is growing in a garden, instead of letting the weeds multiply and actually suffocate the vegetables that you're trying to grow, you nip the weed as soon as possible so they don't even have a chance to grow and choke your vegetables that are growing in your garden. So in the same way, this bhakti lata bija that we're growing in our heart by hearing and chanting every day, when a weed of material desire is manifest, then we should nip it out immediately and not contemplate on the sense objects. And we can only do this, this can have longevity of not meditating, contemplating on the sense objects when we start experiencing a higher taste. Because by forcefully controlling your senses, it won't last unless you're actually experiencing a higher taste of Krishna consciousness. And there's so many examples of that, of yogis in long meditation, but because they hear either a tinkling of an ankle bell from some woman, or they see a pair of animals having intercourse, their minds become agitated, because what they're doing is they're trying with their own strength and their own intelligence to control the senses without depending on Krishna. And that's actually impossible to do. Maya is stronger than the individual will of the jiva who's conditioned in this material world. But who controls Maya is Krishna. So if you take shelter of Krishna, he empowers you to control your senses and experience a higher taste. And Krishna explains how we get to this higher taste. In the 10th verse of the 3rd chapter, he's explaining how in the beginning of creation, he sent forth of generations of men and demigods along with sacrifices for Vishnu. And he said, be thou happy with this yajna, this sacrifice, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. And we know in this age, the sacrifice recommended is the Sankirtan Yajna, Cheto Darpanam Marjanam Bhava Mahadavagmi Nirvarpanam. The more you engage in this process of congregational chanting or attentively chanting japa, hearing the sound vibration is actually a yajna. It's a sacrifice. You're sacrificing your time, your energy, your attention, your life to actually please the Yajna Purusha, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in this age, the Yajna Purusha, the Yuga Avatar. And in the previous verse, text 9 of 3rd chapter, Yagartat Kamanonyatra Lokayam Karma Bandanaha Tadartam Karma Kayumtiya Mukta Sangha Samachara. You have to actually work as a sacrifice for Vishnu. Everything that you do is a sacrifice for Vishnu. In the 9th chapter, Krishna says, Yat Kuroshi Yat Ashnasi Yat Shujosi Dadasi Yat Tapasyasi Kayumti Yat Tat Kurusva Madarpanam. Whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer, give away, do that as a sacrifice for me, for my pleasure. And in this way, you'll always remain free from bondage. The more we work in this material world for our own sense pleasure, either subtle or gross, you actually become more implicated in material existence. And this is a sentence that actually kind of hooked me. When I first read my first book from Srila Prabhupada, before I started practicing sadhana bhakti, it was The Perfection of Yoga. And the whole book, I loved it. It made a lot of sense. And then towards the end of the book, Prabhupada hooked me with 2 sentences. One of them was what I just said, was that if you continue to live in this material world for your own satisfaction, you'll be more implicated in material existence step by step. So I thought to myself, I don't want to become more implicated. I'm already very implicated, so let me become free. And in a couple paragraphs, he said, so one who is intelligent should immediately find the association of devotees. And this is why we have created the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, to give shelter to the conditioned soul, to give them association of Vaishnavas, so they can become free from material existence and go back to Godhead. So this was the hook for me. It made a lot of sense. So this is when Prabhupada came to America, just presenting the facts, the Vedas, this is what actually catches people's attention, is the purity of the knowledge coming down from Parampara. And even he would explain so many things that seems far out if you've never heard of them. Like, I was just watching a documentary where he was in a lecture hall at a university, and these were all students that have never really heard of Krishna, or they didn't know really much about it. And Prabhupada was describing the 5th canto, very, very complicated things having to do with the universe and the order of the planets, and that we've never been to the moon, and all these things. And he said that, so what we're doing is we're presenting the Vedic conclusion, and you can either accept it, or if you like, you cannot accept it. That is up to you, but we're following the order of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So this was Srila Prabhupada's mood. It's just, introducing deity worship. I remember Ananda Swami was saying that when he first moved into New York, in Buffalo, New York, the first day he was given the duty of being the head pujari and the accountant of the temple. And he was brand new his first day. He didn't even know the names of the deities. But this was kind of, this is the mood of expansion, is giving people an opportunity to take up responsibility and actually push forward this divine movement of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. In the verse that we're reading today, instead of controlling your senses, but at the same time dwelling on the objects of the senses, this is why Prabhupada has given us so many things to engage the senses. And the impersonalists, the Buddhists, the Mayavadis, they have this misconception to get rid of the senses, to annihilate the self, to annihilate the mind. But it's actually a false philosophy, because you can't annihilate the self. The self is eternal. You can't annihilate the mind. In the pure state, the soul has a pure mind. The soul has a pure intelligence. The soul has pure senses. So what they're advocating is a philosophy similar to, if someone is sick in the hospital, it's not very intelligent if the patient will accept the doctor saying, you're sick, but I can get rid of your sickness. I'll just inject you with some poison and you can die. I'll just kill you and you won't be sick anymore. So this is kind of like the idea of the nihilistic impersonalists, is that they'd rather commit spiritual suicide than actually regain their spiritual health. And just like a patient intelligently would rather have a certain type of medicine, a certain type of diet to regain his original health so he can act normally in his original state. So Prabhupada has given us so many things to engage the senses. The deity worship, the prasadam, hearing and chanting. 24 hours a day we should mold our consciousness in hearing, chanting, remembering, etc. about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And sarvapati vinirmuktam tatparvena nirbalam hishikesha hishikena sevanam bhaktir uchite. That right now the senses are engaged in material objects, but just by engaging the senses, first of all using the tongue, by tasting Krishna's prasadam and by chanting Krishna's holy name, you actually purify all your senses and you actually come to realize who Krishna really is. So this is a wonderful opportunity. First of all, it's not only the easiest path, but it's the most sublime path, and you actually attain the highest goal, because different yogis, they perform more austerities. It's more rigid, it's not very fun, and it seems like a miserable situation, and they even attain a lesser goal. They attain either Brahman realization, or merging into the Brahman, or they attain Paramatma realization. Or, in some cases, they'll attain the Vaikuntha planets. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us a joyous process where we actually attain the topmost Vaikuntha planet, Goloka Vrindavan Dham. And Lochan Das Thakur in his song, Parma Karuna, he says, this process is Kevala Ananda Kanda. It's blissful from beginning to end. The new bhakta joining for the first day, up until, it's blissful. He's engaging in Krishna consciousness. It's new, it's fresh. But sometimes the freshness, it goes away. And therefore it's very important to fix yourself in the philosophy so you can continue. And the more you become purified, you actually attain higher and higher states of ecstasy. Right? Anartha Nivriti, then Nishta, then Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, all the way up to Prema. So the whole process is Kevala Ananda Kanda. And this is actually experiencing a higher taste. If someone is so conditioned to take eat bread that is very stale and is old and has no taste, but this is all he knows, and this is what's maintaining his body, he'll actually think that he can't live without it. But if someone presents to him a very nice, delicious cake with strawberries and nice toppings, then he won't ever want to go back to that stale old bread again, because he's got something higher. So we see in that how the Krishna conscious movement exploded throughout the world is from giving people this opportunity to taste this cake instead of the stale old bread. And I was just reading just like an hour ago where Prabhupada in 1970, when the devotees were getting ready for the Rath Yatra in San Francisco, Jayananda Prabhu and he had a team of devotees, they were building huge carts. This was going to be the biggest Rath Yatra yet in ISKCON. In the previous year it was smaller, they had one cart, all the deities went on that cart, and it was nice, but now they wanted to do it bigger. They had advertisements all over the city. They even had a couple things similar to billboards where people were driving past in the freeway. They would see the advertisement for the Rath Yatra, and they would put posters on buses and everything like that. Anyways, Prabhupada flew from Los Angeles to San Francisco for the Rath Yatra, and there was a newspaper in San Francisco called The Chronicle, and they were there at the airport, and there were 200 devotees to greet Prabhupada at the airport, and everybody was jumping up and down, chanting. They were throwing roses all over the place. And then this news reporter wanted to interview Prabhupada. So Prabhupada came, the devotees brought some sort of, makeshift Vyasasan in the airport where Prabhupada sat on. And the news reporter started asking, so why have so many young Americans become attracted to this Hare Krishna movement? And Prabhupada's response to that question was, your country has basically unlimited material facilities for enjoyment. But it's time for these young boys and girls to attain a similar opulence in spiritual qualities. So that's why I've come. And the reporter then asked, how many followers do you have? How many devotees do you have? And Prabhupada's reply was unlimited. He said, I have unlimited devotees, just some admit it and some don't admit it. But once you admit that you're a servant of Krishna, all your anxieties and miseries in life will go away. So actually everybody is a Krishna conscious person, but they have just forgotten. And by coming in contact with this Shabda Brahma, this transcendental sound vibration, it awakens their original consciousness. Kapila Dev in the third canto actually explains how this transcendental sound vibration, devotional service, it dissolves your material subtle body. It literally becomes dissolved. And the soul, because the soul does not need a material mind and a material body, it's actually superfluous to have these things. It's a disease condition. It's considered our prison suit. But once we actually engage in devotional service, it dissolves our subtle body, our material subtle body. So what we have left is a pure soul with a pure mind and pure intelligence. And this widespread Shabda Brahma is actually the main core or foundation of our movement. Distributing transcendental literature, this is like kirtan in a box. You give him a box, like Bhagavad-Gita, he opens it up and he just reads it. It's considered kirtan. This Harinam Sankirtan going out every day, and especially here in Vrindavan, it's almost like the spiritual hub. Prabhupada made the point that sound vibration itself, it goes 7 times around the world. Any sound vibration, even material sound vibration. So, especially in Vrindavan, things are multiplied, I think 100-fold. So the sound 24-hour kirtan going on here is actually pervading throughout the whole world. And all the books that have gone out, the Harinam Sankirtan that is continuously going out week after week all over the world, it's creating a fertile ground for us to actually implement Krishna consciousness to the masses. And Krishna is he's the most intelligent, he knows what he's doing. So even if seemingly the world is in some sort of crisis, we have crazy people running the government, it's actually Krishna inconceivably controlling all this, either directly or indirectly, for the purpose of eventually getting the souls back home, back to Godhead. Bhagavatam explains that this whole material world is designed only for that purpose, to help the souls go back home. So everything we see is for that purpose. So it is actually a privilege for us to use this material body and to use this material mind in the process of pleasing Lord Chaitanya. And Lord Chaitanya explains, or rather in Chaitanya Charitamrita and in purport, Prabhupada explains that this is the way to actually curb material lust, is by engaging your energy, engaging your attentiveness in the propagation of Lord Chaitanya Sankirtan movement. And he says that by preaching the teachings of Bhagavad-Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, very quickly that individual who's doing that becomes free from Maya's influence. Just like Haridas Thakur, where Maya Devi came herself to try to persuade him away from his sadhana, but because he was experiencing param drishva, a higher taste, rather than him becoming deviated, she became deviated from her goal, from her mission of diverting his practice, and she actually surrendered to him, became his disciple. Maya herself became Haridas Thakur's disciple. So we understand in the 3rd chapter, when Arjuna asked the question to Krishna, what is it? What is that thing that impels a soul who's actually really endeavoring to control his senses, but forces him to act sinfully, even against his own will? And Krishna explains that it is lust only, Arjuna, and that this lust is born out of the material mode of passion, and this lust is the all-devouring sinful enemy of the soul, the all-devouring sinful enemy of the soul. So when this lust comes, Krishna gives warning in the 2nd chapter. When an army is fighting another army in battle, and you have a spy in your camp, it is very advantageous to your camp to know that a spy is there and where to spot him, where he is, and to either annihilate that spy so your camp does not get annihilated by the other camp. So in the same way, Krishna explains the sitting places of this lust, which is actually considered our worst enemy. He says the lust is situated within the senses, the lust is situated within the intelligence and the mind, and one should be very dubious and very attentive to lust trying to trick us, this Maya using our anarthas to try to engage us in and these sinful propensities of lust. But in the beginning, the devotee who is not a complete paramahamsa, even though these lusty desires may come, he tolerates them, and thus he achieves peace just by doing that. They eventually go away automatically through the purification of sadhana bhakti. Krishna explains in the second chapter, apuryamanam achalapratistam, that he gives the comparison to the ocean, that a person who is not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires, which they enter like rivers into the ocean, which is ever being filled but is always still, can alone achieve peace, and not the man who strives to satisfy such desires. So even though these desires are coming, one who is not chasing after them is like the ocean with the rivers coming in. He remains peaceful. And elsewhere in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna is explaining that when the conditioned soul is impelled by the three modes of material nature, but the transcendentalist, he sees when these material modes are acting, and that these material modes are actually in competition with one another. Sometimes tamagun is more prominent, sometimes rajagun is more prominent, and sometimes sattvagun is more prominent. And Krishna actually says that they compete against one another. So one can see that when lust comes, or when ignorance comes, or when the mode of goodness comes, it's actually not him. It's not the soul. It's just basically like a cloud coming in front of your eyes for some time and eventually leaving. So by tolerating these three modes of material nature, one actually becomes transcendental to them. And in the fourth canto, Maitreya Muni is speaking to Vidura, and he's explaining about Maharaj Prachini Barishat, how he had 10 sons named the Prachetas, and how he instructed his sons to get married, have progeny, become Prajapatis. But they knew that to do this, to become empowered to do this, they had to perform penances and austerities. So they started heading west to perform austerities, but as they were doing that, they came in contact with Lord Shiva's domain near the Himalayas, Shiva Loka. And it explains there that before they met Lord Shiva, they saw how beautiful the scene was, that they were nice. It was just a very pleasant scene with beautiful birds and everything like that. And they came upon a lake, and this lake was very still, it was very quiet, very peaceful. And Maitreya Rishi was explaining to Vidura that the lake was as still as a great soul's mind. And in the purport, Prabhupada was explaining how he referred to this verse, chapter 2, text 70, how the mind of a great soul is like a calm, vast water, and within the water, the aquatics that are living there, the inhabitants, they also feel very peaceful because they've actually taken shelter of the peaceful water. So then he goes on to explain, the aquatics are compared to the disciples of a great soul who has a peaceful mind. And because they have taken shelter of a great soul with a peaceful mind, they also become peaceful. So it's not that the qualification of the guru necessarily is to be completely free from desires up to the point where there's no material desires coming at all, but rather he has the integrity and the ability to control them. Rupa Goswami also explains this in Nectar of Instruction, Vacha Vegam, Manasakroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Uttara Pasta Vegam, Etam Veham Yo Visaheta Deoram. Forgot the rest of the verse. But basically the English is one who can tolerate the mind's demands, the actions of anger, the urges of the tongue, the belly and the genitals, is qualified to make disciples all over the world. So also saying in this verse, the advanced transcendentalist is not necessarily free completely, but he is not disturbed by them. The second canto explains akama sarva kama va moksha karma adadadi. Whether you have no material desires, whether you're full of material desires, whether you desire liberation, you should engage in the devotional service of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because by this process, all your desires will be fulfilled. Not necessarily meaning that all your material desires will be fulfilled, but the desire of the soul will be fulfilled, which is actually to love Krishna. And that's why everybody in this world is actually chasing material things, subtly or grossly. It's because what's missing within their heart is their original Krishna prema. So to fulfill that void within their heart, they're trying to fulfill it with intoxicants, girlfriends, whatever, Facebook, so basically unlimited things. So in that same verse in the 4th canto, Prabhupada is explaining that it's only the devotees whose mind is still like the calm water. Because the yogi, he actually desires something. The jnani desires, bhukti kami, the materialist desires material enjoyment. The yogi desires, siddha kami, mystic powers. The jnani desires moksha kami. He's lusty after liberation. He doesn't want to suffer anymore. He wants to merge into the Brahman. So they actually have desire within their heart. But one may ask, Prabhupada explains, this was actually a sentence in the purport. He said, people may ask us, well, what about the devotees? Aren't they desirous because they want to go back to Godhead? And Prabhupada's response to that was, yes, they have that desire, but that's the natural desire of the soul. All other desires are artificial. Therefore, the desire to please Krishna and go back to Godhead, they don't agitate their mind. They actually free the mind from agitation. And he said, and although the devotees may have a desire to go back to Godhead, but still they're happy within any condition of life. And that verse quoted where Lord Shiva is explaining that whether in Vaikuntha, within this material world, or the hellish planets, or Swargaloka, the heavenly planets, the devotee is okay with anything, because he's actually he serves Krishna wherever he goes. And this has been told by at least 2 devotees in Geneva, in Sweden, in the early 70s. Prabhupada visited a small temple there, and one devotee asked Prabhupada the question, where will you go when you leave your body? And according to this devotee, Prabhupada told him that I will go to the lower planets to preach Krishna consciousness. And the same thing was told by Bhavananda Prabhu on another occasion, where he asked Prabhupada the same question. So whether that's true or not, I can't say 100%, but according to these devotees, that's what Prabhupada said. But this just gives the example that the devotee is happy when Krishna is happy. And if Krishna is happy with us going to hell to help liberate the conditioned souls, then the devotee is ecstatic doing that. And Bhagavatam also explains in purport Narada Muni, he sometimes does that. He goes to the hellish planets and he chants Hare Krishna, and those inhabitants eventually become purified and attain a human form and they already have a Gyata Sukriti from hearing a pure devotee chant while they were in the hellish planets. So it's a very exciting process. It's Krishna consciousness. It's actually there's no anxiety to even go back to Godhead. And even the pure Mahabhagavat, who is actually being directed by Krishna to write the books, who has access to seeing Krishna's pastimes and to experience Krishna's Leela within the mind, within his heart, he can go anywhere because he has Krishna within. It's explained the example just like spiritual television. You turn on the television, you can see something happening across the world. So similarly, the pure devotee who has direct communion with Krishna has a spiritual television within his heart. He can see what's going on in Goloka Vrindavan, although he may be in the hellish planets, heavenly planets, or within the middle planetary systems. giving Krishna consciousness to others. So this was the mood of Srila Prabhupada that he gave us. This was the mood of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who said every town and village, and one place, or at least in one place, maybe in a couple places, but at least in one place I recall Prabhupada explaining in a purport as the universal movement. People throughout the whole universe are chanting Hare Krishna and trying to take advantage. They said that the demigods are lining up to, they're waiting in queue to take birth as a human in Kali Yuga, to take advantage of this rare opportunity in one human form, one human lifetime, to actually attain the topmost planet, Goloka Vrindavan. So this is all I think of saying right now. Does anybody have any questions or any corrections? Yes, Prabhu.
Just like desire which we are having, and if the soul is having a desire, there is soul and super soul in our body. The desire, who is having that desire?
Yeah. He was asking, since the super soul and the soul are within the body, when someone has a material desire, or any desire, when the soul has any desire, who's desiring that? Well, I would say in one perspective, both the soul and the super soul. The reason why I say that is because what I referred to earlier, just like in the 18th chapter, text 61, Krishna explains how the Paramatma is actually directing the wanderings of all living entities, and if this material universe is only created to help the conditioned souls become rehabilitated and go back home, back to Godhead, then the super soul is directing the wanderings of the soul to help him eventually. It may take many lifetimes, but eventually take up sadhana bhakti. But the reason this being is because the super soul, or Krishna, wants that soul not to be in a diseased condition and to actually be in his eternal home with the loving relationship with Krishna. So in that sense, the super soul is directing the wanderings of the individual soul. But it's the soul itself that is desiring to turn away from Krishna, and it's the soul itself who's desiring to face Krishna. And basically, the soul itself doesn't have much freedom. We have like two options. We can either choose Maya or Krishna. So when we choose Maya, that's our own free will, that's our own desire. And when we choose Krishna, that's also Krishna's desire, but we have to do it out of our own inclination. So that makes sense the way I explained that. It's the soul desiring, but the super soul is there directing the soul to help him go back to Godhead.
Also the desire, who is giving that desire? The super soul is giving the desire, or soul is giving the desires? How the desires are coming?
Well, Krishna gives free will. The desire itself is originally pure in the spiritual world before the living entity even comes to this material world. Just like the vast majority of living entities in all of existence, they never even come here. Prabhupada said on one occasion in Los Angeles, in his quarters upstairs, that less than 10% of the jivas in all of existence come to this material world. So the jiva itself has desire. It's the nature of the soul. But someone who's completely pure in Goloka Vrindavan, they desire to make garlands for Krishna, or herd the cows with Krishna, or help cook Krishna food. So it's Krishna giving us the free will to desire, the ability to do anything. So yeah, it's Krishna. Yes, my trip.
Yeah.